Hello, everyone. I'm Linda McGafflin, president of Imago and an exhibiting artist here. And I'm delighted to welcome you to our ongoing 20th anniversary celebration. Tonight, you'll be treated to a very special multidisciplinary panel, Perspectives on Time, put together by our Special Initiatives Committee, facilitated by Anne Marie Rossi, and committee members Vivian Iyer, Clara Reed, Katie Reeves, Susan Walker, and Carolyn Wyndham. And please look around while you're here to take a look at some of the art on the same theme curated by our exhibition committee, facilitated by Mary Dondero and a committee made up of IFA exhibiting artists and community members. As I hope you can tell, it really does take a village to keep a nonprofit arts organization like Imago going, and we're grateful to our members and the community support that has been our lifeblood. I first met our moderator, Linda Board, more than 30 years ago, and she was a reporter for the Providence Journal, and I was the media spokesperson for a technology company in Attleboro. Having recently made the switch from journalism to PR, I was aware of the pitfalls that came along with talking to reporters. Yet from our first interaction, I sensed that she was a reporter that knew how to get to the nub of the matter in an empathetic way that took account of the nuances of some very complex issues. A 35-year Projo veteran, Linda covered public education in addition to legal proceedings, law enforcement, and Providence City Hall. In retirement, she is training her new rescue dog, Charlie, who is very adventuresome as far as I can tell, and volunteering as a tutor in the Providence Public Schools. I'm looking forward to tonight's discussion, as I know she will lead us through a fascinating conversation about time seen through the lens of different vocations and life experiences. And now, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Linda, who will welcome our panelists and get things started.
Hi, everybody. I'm Linda. I'm sorry I'm facing away from you. Let me introduce the panelists from left to right. Vivian Iyer, a poet. Camille Abdel Nabi, an organic farmer. Gabrielle Sclafani, a chaplain. Ray Terry, a filmmaker archivist. Mary Dondero, an artist. And Cassie Roberge, a biomedical engineer. So what I'm hoping to do is get everybody involved in a dialogue. So feel free to jump in. The only thing I ask is everybody kind of keep their answers short so we can all participate. And then afterward, if the audience has questions, by all means, we can do that. So my first question is, how does time express itself in your discipline? And anyone can start. Vivian, how about you? I'm kind of going.
Yeah, so how does time? So poetry, of course, has a structure. We talk about sonnets, which have a certain 5 beats to a line, 10 syllables. We have erasure poems, where you would take a text and you would erase words, so you're erasing time. You know, poets are are very rarely read in America. I think there are only 11% of Americans read poetry, and yet we are masters on the page of time because we make time disappear. We talk about elegies, we go back in memory, and so I think beyond the issue of structuring time to write poems, I think we use time in the creation of poems.
Great. Gabrielle, how about you?
Well, in healthcare chaplaincy, which is the kind of chaplaincy in which I work, we're talking about people who are sick. And time moves very differently when our bodies are no longer doing what we want them to, or in the work I do now, I work with children, many of whom have terminal or life-limiting conditions. And so when you're 12 years old and you know that you are unlikely to live past 20, your perspective on time is going to be very different from what my perspective on time might have been when I was 12 years old, as well as from what a 80-year-old who's lived a really long life and is also approaching end of life might feel. And so that lends itself to conversations happening in a different way and also happening with more urgency. I tend to encounter people at times when there's a lot that needs to be resolved, and time both drags and it seems like you can't get enough of it.
How about you, Ray?
Yeah, well, time and archives, archives are sort of a mechanism that archives are sort of a mechanism that are designed specifically to cheat time, right? You're specifically trying to take an object or an item or some sort of recording and stop it from decaying and stop it from doing what it naturally would do, which is go through a sort of cycle of decay and death, and kind of hold it frozen. And I think filmmaking, similarly, my medium, moving image archiving specifically, you're taking something that is not just an image or not something that is just an object that you can hold, but something that is a recording of someone through time, and then trying to cheat time with it. I think about it a lot, at least in the film that I'm working on right now. There's a lot of footage of me specifically saying into a camera, "Hello, you person who is watching this thing in the future," and sort of thinking about what that means. Yeah.
Cool. Mary, how about?
Well, there's never enough time, that's for sure. But as a visual artist, expressing time there's a lot of ways that visual artists express time through visual language, and so there's a lot of different tools and ways that we manipulate the image that can give different ideas about time or express time to people. And also very interesting to me is how time can be experienced differently from what I call my normal life, or when I'm immersed in the act of making, when there's loss of time, or I lose a sense of time, don't know how much there is.
Wow, that's interesting. And Cassie?
Yeah, so within kind of engineering in general, there's not as much flexibility or openness to like experiencing time differently. It's more of just an absolute, and we use it obviously in like things like equations and everything that we rely on to get systems to work together fluidly and in harmony. So it's more perceived as like an absolute unit rather than being able to experience it maybe like, oh, time is passing quickly or it's a long day, something like that. It's more of just an absolute value that keeps cropping up in all of our work.
And I think I skipped Camille. Apologies.
No problem.
Yours must be seasonal, or I'm not going to say for you, but you're very different experience.
Yeah, definitely different times of the season. In the spring, there's a lot of sunlight. Daylight is kind of growing, so at that time, you want to make sure not to plant things too close together. You have all your lettuce coming in at the same time. But we grow pretty much until the Christmas time. So now we're doing the opposite. In about 5 or 6 weeks, we have to plant our greenhouses full of spinach and lettuce. And with that, if you do not plant it by a certain date, it will just not mature. So we're dealing with, definitely sunlight, how that affects the growing time of our crops. So definitely every season has a little bit of a different relationship to time, and there's slower times as well where we feel like we can rest, and then usually come March or April we feel like a race against the clock just to start our season, to get things in the ground.
Cool, thank you. Okay. Hold on, gotta put my glasses on. Is time always linear? I was doing some prep work and I kind of went down the rabbit hole. I started reading famous philosophers like Sartre and, you know, a little excerpt, not the whole book. But, you know, there's all these different theories about linear versus circular versus coming back to the same moment. Who would like to jump in and talk about if time progresses like history does? Go ahead, Mary.
I'm thinking, I'm going to speak only about the studio experience. And I'm also thinking this is the appropriate audience to mention Frank Zappa. And I always stood out in my mind the way he expressed this idea. He expressed time in a certain way, which I feel when I'm working, really well, or I know I'm making a piece that's going to work out properly or well or good, whatever. It's because all the things have converged at that time and moment. So it could be the weather, it could be, you know, so weather, temperature, and humidity, as well as what's happening in the background in my life and all those things. It's a moment in time. So for me, during creation of artwork, it's about convergent time that converges.
And I think you said in your notes you sent to me that when you're deep in the artistic process, you're like in a fugue state, like time, there's no sense of time.
There is no sense of time, but I don't think I can make good work unless all these things converge into a moment, and the moment being a representation of time.
Interesting. Any other thoughts about time, linear or not?
Yeah, I would agree with Mary, you know, on the page that to dwell in time, right? So it's more than carving out time. So it's being able, the qualitative aspect of time that you need in order to create a poem. One of the poets, Arthur Z., who's a Chinese-American poet, does a lot of work on simultaneity of time. So as we sit in this room, in this panel, in Brazil, at the same time, something else is happening, and in Kansas, something else is happening. And so to help us try to broaden our sense of diversity and also similarity.
Great, go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of want to, I think you asked, is time linear like history is?
Right.
And I think for me in my work anyways, as a Black trans person in archives, I've always sort of pushed back since undergrad at the idea that history itself is linear.
Oh, interesting.
I think
Okay.
that there's a sort of a fugitivity to the way that I think about time, because, and you're thinking about, I guess a way to explain it is to think about, I have a babysitter, my babysitter from when I was a kid, who just happens to be Gullah-Geechee like my family, she's 95 years old. And she used to always hate to get her photo taken. She'd be like, don't take my photograph. And I never really understood that. I was thinking about it on the way here, is that there's a sort of way that, I don't know, in our sort of Western way of thinking about time as linear, that there's a, if you take a photograph of someone, you're capturing them, right, through time for your own uses, you know, after they're gone. And I don't know, my brain's all over the place right now. But I think that what I'm trying to sort of do in my work as a filmmaker and as an archivist is sort of think through ways, sort of other ways of thinking about time, not necessarily as linear, but as circular, like you said, and as a sort of, I don't know, it's one of those things you can't explain, right? It's like, what is time? It's like sort of a flat bed where we all are existing on this plane in different sort of ways of time. Specifically, I'm thinking about ancestors who've been captured in film or something, who, that's what my project I'm working on now is kind of, if I go down south and I capture this footage of the water, of the land where my ancestors were, what is that? You know, is that still a sort of spiritually activated material? Is it a sort of conversation, a dialogue that's being opened through time? And what is my responsibility to that, I think.
Do you think it's like bringing a story forward? Because you mentioned future earlier.
Yeah. Well, I think in the project I was specifically thinking about the stories that we're told about where we come from by the people who can tell us,
So it's past, bringing it.
bringing it into the future. But a lot of the time, Black folks, queer folks don't have those people to tell those stories to you. And so what does that, like, what do you do with that? And when you get those materials, do you know, like, do you edit it? Because when you're editing time, you're manipulating time. Are you allowed to do that, or is it something that you should leave alone? I don't know. But yeah, I'm in the middle of a project, so y'all are gonna catch up tonight.
Gabrielle, your perspective as someone who deals with mortality, does time feel like it stops with your clients, or what's that?
So it's interesting that Ray, that you brought up your babysitter. I also had a babysitter who hated having her picture taken, and she worked for my family for 18 years. So she was my sister's babysitter from the time she was an infant, and my babysitter until I was 9 years old. And it was working with her, or not working with her, loving her, and also loving my own grandparents, who all three of whom died from complications related to dementia, that I think pushed me in this direction of working in chaplaincy, particularly, in addition to ministry. And I think any one of us who has spent time with someone who has any form of dementia would say, and unequivocally, no, time is not linear, because we have people all around us who are actually living in other space-times and in unshared realities. And this is what I notice over and over again in healthcare chaplaincy, is I'm exposed to people who society doesn't know what to do with. I'm exposed to a lot more people who have dementia than you meet on the street. I'm exposed to people who are on inpatient behavioral health units. I'm exposed to people who are so disabled that it's hard to leave the house. And all of those groups have different perceptions of time than people who live the kinds of schedules that most of us in this room do. And time bends in those spaces, and especially when we're working with people who might have dementia, or people who might be having experiences of another reality, and they're literally talking to people who I can't see, but those people are so real. And it's part of my work to be able to enter into that space, even if it is a form of time travel.
Now, for someone who farms, what's that sense? I mean, are you, traditionally you're sort of governed by the seasons, but is there a circularity in your profession, your work?
Yeah, I mean, I always will say this to my employees, or just people I'm talking to, is I've only been farming for 10 years, and in a lot of ways that sounds like a long time, but in other ways it's like I've only had 10 chances to plant garlic. So it's both linear, because I have all the records of, we planted it on this date last year and we did this, and you're kind of following, when did we get it out of the ground? And following time in that rigid sense is very important to our business, to just kind of know, okay, when do we need to plant that? When is it going to be done? And what do we have to do around it? But definitely just thinking about, where I was 10 years ago to now, and how much I've learned, but also that I've only had 10 chances to plant certain things, to work it that way, but then to also think about our property that was a historic farm, and a lot of people in the community have come to us and said, oh, we used to stop at the stand and buy their corn. They were really well known for their corn and their raspberries, and to just share those stories, and it almost feels like we're just continuing that same thing that's been going on for so long, that it's kind of like there's no definition of time for.
So you've got both going.
We have both going on. We're on a rigid schedule every day. It's like we better be out there at 8 a.m. on these days harvesting, but also, we have a lot of ability to have creativity in our career, more than a lot of people would realize, just dictating what we plant, how we make the bunches. So it's both very rigid, but also has this kind of free property to it. And obviously we're very married to the daylight and that type of stuff. So it's a
Yeah.
little bit of both
Of both.
experiences.
Anyone else want to jump in that I haven't asked their thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, at least within the work that I do, which is primarily in like breast cancer research, a lot of what we're doing is just continuously building on the foundational work that has been done by scientists or researchers prior. So we don't really experience or get to experience a lot of kind of bending of time, as you said, I like that term. It's mostly just looking at what's in front of you and taking it one step further. And it does feel very just, almost like marching. It doesn't really have as much freedom and creativity, I think, as maybe some of the other professions, where I may go in one day and just set up an experiment that I know I'm going to come back to in 48 hours or something like that. Like it's all well delineated, I guess.
But you must also have the big picture of breast cancer survival rate, so it does plug into a much larger
Yeah, absolutely.
scheme.
Right, and it's been attacking this problem for however many generations we've had it now, right? So it's just taking different kind of approaches to it, to the same, I guess, disease or same issue, which might, I don't know. I wouldn't describe it entirely as like circular or anything, but it does feel like we're coming back to the same thing each time.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that about like repetition?
A little bit repetition, yeah, because if you do get something right, you want to make sure you can get it right again to make sure it's safe for a patient to say. So yeah, it is. You have that repetition there, and the repetition that trains you how to be decent at being a scientist or any job. That kind of gets you to the qualified position where you can even touch that work.
And Vivian, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the only other thing I would say is it's so interesting to me how I can relate to everything that each person has said, the repetition in poetry, the seasonal aspect, the archival aspect of going back in family history to write about what's precious there. So I think that I think it's a combination of things, Linda, I think it's linear, circular, simultaneous, it's all of those things at once.
So I'm going to shift a little bit. I'm wondering how each of you felt that COVID affected your sense of time and your work. I know for me, I was suddenly working at home. I didn't have a community of writers around me. I didn't really have an editor. I was covering everything online. The computer would stop in the middle of a discussion. It was very frustrating. And I missed the collegiality of the newsroom. Anyone jump in? How did COVID impact your work?
I was delighted.
I had a feeling you'd say that.
I was imagining what are all the people who are not artists doing? There's nothing more precious than being given stay at home. Okay. I'll do of course I was scared just like everybody else, and I had some of the frustrations that we all did during that height of everything, and making sure, but the time that I was given was so precious, and I wanted to utilize it, and I was very happy to focus on my work.
Great.
And my work oftentimes, it doesn't come to the surface in the image all the time, but underneath it's always about the fragility of life and how transient everything is. And so it was interesting to be thinking about that during such a devastating time to the global community. Yeah.
Who else wants to?
It was a very crazy time to be a local farmer, because it was very much heightened at that time that everybody should, know their food source, and you didn't want to go in the grocery store. So we got the call, our farmer's market was closing down, and we had fields full of vegetables. So in a couple days, I made a Google form and we launched the home delivery service through it, and then quickly saw that it was going to take off, so got a whole online ordering platform that we still use to this day. But yeah, the demand was crazy. It was the most sales we ever had, so it was a tiring year. But that same year, my wife and I got married. That was in January, so we were kind of the last hurrah.
Yeah.
And we actually got the property in September of 2020, so it was I never had that experience of feeling bored, of being stuck alone. I was always just kept working my life.
Right.
Didn't actually change that much, other than got a little bit busier, and the farmers markets were kind of weird. People couldn't come and touch the vegetables. We had to get them for them. But generally, yeah, it was a very definitive moment that kind of got us to where we are now for our business.
I can speak a little bit. I was a student at the time. I was doing my PhD program, and like everything just came to a halt. All of my work is in person in a lab handling cells and stuff. So I just came to a complete halt, and it was honestly the most freeing experience I've ever had. I got weird into art. I was texting and all these questions like what color should I add here? And yeah, it was honestly really awesome. It saved me from a lot of burnout, and I think it just gave me this, I could step back from all of that repetition that I'd been, engaged in, and absolutely loved it. Obviously it was, completely clouded by the situation and the gravity of all of that. But me personally, just stuck at home in my room, I was just having a grand old time, not being in, in the thick of it.
Interesting.
God save the science kids.
Yeah. We were just derping around trying to find art to fill our time and baking bread.
How about you, Ray?
I don't know. I think I'm like a very socially anxious, shy person. So I was like, yeah, this is awesome. I think I'm realizing now that I'm still having trouble adjusting. And I'm grown, I'm 28 years old. I'm not like a kid who was like, oh, this is normal. But it was still normal for me. So I'm having trouble adjusting back to talking to people and being social. But as I was listening to everyone, I guess the film that I made that sort of got me here, I think, Katie, I don't know if that was the film Entering the Beyond, was sort of, I was in school, I was at Brown getting my master's in public humanities, and I had given up. I started as an undergrad as a film student. I hadn't made a film in years, and I sort of made this grand 15-minute party film at the end of spring 2021. And I guess thinking about it now, listening to everyone, how it affected your work, I guess I was kind of cooped in, and I was sort of in the Brown bubble in this environment that I wasn't used to, and really kind of longing for this Black trans community that I had previously been a part of. And so I think maybe having that extra pressure, sort of in a way, that sort of extra baking by yourself in your room sort of made that kind of explode out of me in a way that I cannot explain. I keep trying to make more work, and I'm like, it's not the same. Because I think that there was just really, that sort of pressure cooker energy going on at the time.
It's all those things converging.
Converging, yeah.
Yeah. And Gabrielle, for you, having to deal with terminal patients at a time when the whole world felt terminal, what was that like?
I wasn't working in healthcare
Oh, you
during
weren't in
COVID.
healthcare.
No, I
Yeah.
came to healthcare after COVID. I definitely witnessed how traumatized people were. My first supervisor, even as recently as a year ago, was still sanitizing all the packages from the grocery store. But I was living in Germany and working with refugees, and we had a kind of soft experience in the beginning of COVID compared to what was happening where I had been living in New York, or even what was happening in Italy. And the Germans are great rule followers, and the big thing was, are you following all the rules? I also had a concussion at the time, so my sense of time was already skewed from needing so much sleep, and yeah, it's like a really wavy memory.
Yeah. So my only sister lives in Virginia, and she's a clinical psychologist with a geriatric specialty. So during the pandemic, she was working in nursing homes. And despite my pleas to reduce her work schedule, she wouldn't. So she would don her hazmat suit. And I forgot to mention, she also has a breathing problem. So I was in a heightened state of fear and worry about my sister. Coincidentally, I happened to be writing poems about the dying marine world, about beached whales and cold-stunned sea turtles that were dying. And so I became aware that these feelings of anxiety and vulnerability and fragility that I was feeling about my sister, I was somehow infusing the work that I was doing about sea creatures with all of those feelings I had.
Next question, again, sort of a pivot. How has the rise of social media, I know it changed my reporting world dramatically. It became a 24/7, which I hated, news cycle. How has that impacted your work? Whoever wants to start.
Well, I think in the science community, it's very strange and very unexpected, but everyone is on Twitter and they're all promoting their publications or their research and stuff. So with Twitter expanding, it became just a really self-loving place up there where everyone was just like, I'm so great, look at all this cool stuff I'm doing. And at the same time, it did like broaden accessibility to each other's work, which is obviously really cool and I mean, if you're aware that someone else has already done something, why go back and redo it? Just look at what they've already done. So I think it probably saved people a lot of time. But yeah, either it's a time sink as it's taking us away from our work, or at least in this case, it was expanding a lot of access. So I think it
Was there
saved
more
some time.
collegiality because people were interacting on social media?
I think so, yeah. And inadvertently, I think it created a sort of casual peer review process as well, because people could comment immediately after reading that work and say like, I actually don't know if you did this right, or wow, this is a really cool experimental setup, this looks great, I'm going to implement this. And yeah, absolutely.
How about for you, Camille?
Yeah, I think from the business perspective, especially, our business before was down in Exeter, Rhode Island is where the farm was originally started. So moving to Warren, and our goal since we've been here was really just trying to get to know the community as much as possible. It's definitely been a very positive thing for us just to be able to connect with people and tell them, our story and what our purpose is with the farm. So definitely see it as a positive for the business side. Still have those personal feelings sometimes where you're like, I just scrolled for 30 minutes for no reason. And so it's always that bit of a conflict, but for the business, it's been great. But I always say, I'm really glad I was like right on that cusp of not having it during high school and middle school, and I definitely worry for the generations who it's so ingrained in their life, and what does that necessarily do? But generally for running a small business, and it's been a positive thing.
How about you, Ray? How has it affected you?
Social media? How has it affected me?
Count the ways.
Well, I got on social media when I was a baby. And not, I'm like the last that remember before. I'm looking at these kids like, are y'all okay? I don't think that they're okay. I have a really crazy relationship to social media. I grew up in a town in Bridgewater, Mass. That was fairly racist when I was a kid, and probably still is, but maybe less now. And sort of had to make all of my friends online, and so social media for me is this huge thing. And y'all are actually catching me 1 week after I first deactivated my Instagram ever in my life.
I thought you were gonna say Twitter, but Instagram.
No, Twitter's kind of dying anyway. Yeah, I was on Twitter in 2008 when it was just me and like Beyonce. You could like tweet at her and she would reply. But I am noticing, and I'm still, very much in the wake of this, and I've reactivated since. I think I'm gonna deactivate it again probably tomorrow. I have noticed a sort of shift in the way that I am dealing with my work in it. In that my Instagram goes back to, I'm an archivist, right? So even though I'm like very critical of archives and what they're trying to do, I have this massive impulse to just save everything all the time. And so every Instagram post I've ever posted since my senior year of high school was still on my Instagram. And I just went and I found out that you can archive them and take them off of your page. So now I only have my last 2 Instagram posts on my page. And today I posted another. This is gonna be a bit of a weird story. But today I posted another of work that I made in the last, 5 years or so that I just found on my hard drive. And I was like, this is great, I should post this. Where I wouldn't have posted it before because it was already posted, but years ago. And so now I'm like, I don't know, it's sort of changing the way that I'm even engaging, not only with myself personally, but with my work. Where my work can now, instead of being this sort of, I think I was thinking of it as like, someone, somewhere is gonna scroll down my Instagram page and find these posts, and that's my history, is now becoming, oh, there's work that I made that I really love that I can highlight, that doesn't have to be a part of this linear narrative that I was sort of creating in my mind via social media.
So why did you take it down?
It was getting on my nerves. It's a lot of noise, It's a lot of noise. And I didn't realize it really until I deactivated. It was really a hard thing. I think a friend of mine deactivated a couple months ago. It was like, I need a break. And I was like, you're crazy. And I turned it off and it was like, whoa, I'm like alive. I'm like a whole being in the world with a body. And I'm now seeing my friends and being like, y'all gotta kind of come out of there, That's gonna be my next battle. But yeah. Again, the kids, I don't know.
Vivian.
It's a big change for poets to have to be personalities. Emily Dickinson didn't take a photograph of her scrambled eggs in the morning and keep it on Instagram. So it's not enough to be known on the page. And that's a stretch because many poets, or maybe I'll just speak for myself, are introverts. I'm basically an introvert. So it's difficult to, and as a poet, you're not really seen, because you're on the page. Right now, all of a sudden, you have to be visible, you have to have a brand, and it's, I guess if I were being, completely positive, we would say that that's an enriching experience. But I would also say it's kind of a terrifying experience too.
Cassie, how about you? Oh, we already talked to you. Mary, we haven't gotten you.
Oh. I have a strange relationship. I'm good with it, with the social media, then I hate it. Have mixed feelings about it, that's how it is. And sometimes it makes me feel very small, really tiny. Because it immediately makes your community overwhelmingly large. However, I learned that I'm a very intense voyeur. It turns us all into some kind of voyeur, and this voyeurism. And I try to just stay to Instagram, and I try to only look at art. And originally I was very excited about, love the way this person did this with their work or something, but now it's trite, and it's, I don't know, I have mixed feelings about it. Like I said, But what I do want to do, I started to do this a couple years ago. I'm trying to think of a way of turning Instagram not into an archive of my life and have terrible pictures of my scrambled eggs, but somehow turn it into a medium that becomes the art material. And so that's what I'm trying to dig into now to see if that can work.
And Gabrielle.
So I have sort of like faded away from social media. I see that it disturbs a lot of my patients, particularly the adolescent patients, in just terms of how unhealthy it is for us as humans to compare ourselves to one another. And on this subject of time, I preserve my social media because it is an archive. It's an archive of photos, it's an archive of people. I don't have a Rolodex anymore. I grew up with a Rolodex, and if I needed someone's phone number, I could look there, and people's phone numbers didn't change. And now people get new numbers all the time. We're in a really mobile society. And so it's helpful that when I travel places, I can add people on social media, and then I can look them up just by their name, and they reappear to me. There are dozens, if not hundreds of people who I wouldn't have contact with otherwise. And so yeah, it's a love-hate relationship, and I know that writ large, it's not healthy for us and for the way that we interact with one another.
I think I'm getting to the end of my questions. How are we doing time-wise? Open it up to the audience. Yeah, why don't we do that? So, folks, just jump in with any questions. Go ahead, Howard.
I have played with this concept of the elasticity of time, and it originally started because I noticed that when I was working, if I left at the normal time, it would take me X minutes to get into work. But if I left 5 minutes later, it wasn't 5 minutes later that I arrived. It was sometimes 15 or 20. So there was kind of that physical aspect of time. But I also noticed that it was perceptual. You know, when you're a kid, a year is like forever. Yeah, it's really a long, long time. Now, you know, with my aging brain, it seems like a year passes in a flash. Or I find, like Mary, when I'm creating, that what to me is a couple of moments could be hours, because Susan's going, oh, are you going to stop soon? And I'm going, oh, what time is it? You know, it's just that the time compresses or expands. And I was wondering how each of you confronts the elasticities, either in a practical sense or in a perceptual sense.
You make me think, Howard, of there are some times when I go into a visit, and this happened more in the hospital than in my current work, but I'd be like, oh my God, this is gonna go on forever. Like, this person is just gonna talk to me, I'm hungry, and I don't sound very pastoral right now, but you know, there are times when it really feels like there's this eternity before us. And more often than not, I might feel that way in the beginning when I were like warming up with a person, and then all of a sudden I check my watch and an hour has gone by, and it's like time to wrap this up. And I think that the passage of time really depends on affect. Like, when we're in this flow state, like Mary and Howard are referring to, we have no sense of time passing, whereas when we are in some kind of intellectual agony or pain, it feels like it stretches forever and ever.
I think when you can sever yourself from all the things outside of you. So if you're an artist, you're focusing on the creation, or like in your work, you suddenly are focusing on another person. So if you can sever all these external things and turn the phone off, right? Then time can be elongated or stretched, or however you're seeing it, Howard, or flexible. And I think that's quite lovely because it becomes one of the most important things that is our personal experience.
I think what I would say is, if someone said to me, how long did it take you to write that poem?
Oh.
I wouldn't have an answer, Howard, because I'm writing the poem at my desk. I'm writing the poem when I'm walking my dog. I'm writing the poem right now when I'm here, because I'm always working. I'm always looking for dialogue or something that someone says, or a color or something that I can infuse, because I'm keeping my project in my head. So I guess that's saying it's elastic, because I don't know the beginning. I guess the end is when I have the poem on the paper, typed up. But what it took to get there is very elastic.
Frank Zappa would say it took your whole life.
Whoever's in the corner, yeah, go ahead.
Hi. And this goes to something that you said, Ray. One of my favorite comments on time is in The Moviegoer by Walker Percy. He frames the novel about having seen movies younger in his life and then going back and seeing them again later in life, and how seeing it after all that time intervened, how that changed his view of the movie itself and how he felt about the movie, as well as that intervening time, how the first part of his life and the next part of his life bookended and changed his view of the movie. Just wanted to see what people thought of that.
Anyone else?
Well, I can say to both of
Oh,
you,
yeah, go ahead.
actually. Yeah, I don't know. I think that time, it's one of the things that irritates me the most, I think, in the world, actually, is how that same thing, like, when I was 4, I remember being like, a year? Oh, God, that's literally like a fourth of my life. And now being like, and the way that sort of, I'm sad today, so it's a long day. I'm happy today, so it's a short day. And I'm like very like hyper aware of that. And I'm gonna pick on Cassie now. Because Cassie said earlier that time, I'm sort of science brain. Time is this sort of uniform unit that you are sort of always working with it. And I am envious of that. But also to sort of zoom out from that, because I just watched this documentary on the plane from Europe about the Webb telescope, right? And one of the scientists said something about, I'm working on this thing now so that scientists 2-3 generations from now will, pick the same work up. And it is a sort of repetitive thing, I think, for us, as if I was the scientist working on it and I'm going and doing these same things, but then you have another and another and another. It's a sort of collapsing of time in a way. Or the way I would think about it in my mind is an archive of, I think about archives as sort of a bodily performance, a sort of thing that you do. So I don't know what, my grandfather was a tiler. If my dad was a tiler and I was a tiler, and we're all doing this repetitive motion, this repetitive thing every day, then there's a sort of collapsing of time. And so when I think about the elasticity of time, I don't know, I get all kerfuffled.
That's a good word. Anyone else's thoughts? When you're farming, do you get into that Zen sort of moment?
Well, I think I got into farming because I have a little bit of a manic personality where I have a very hard time not doing something, with all of my time. And lately I've been trying to be like, it's okay to just end the day at 5 p.m. and actually just, sit and not feel that I'm always hyper aware. I'm like, okay, I can do this and do that next, and kind of not measure my day, I guess, in productivity. That's what I think I'm trying to get away from. Like, well, I got all this done today, so that was, a good day. And also sometimes, in farming, something just you're not expecting goes wrong, and your whole day goes out of whack because you're fixing this thing or whatever. So it's also just saying, it's okay if that didn't get done today, and kind of trying to take back control of time that way too. But trying to have a better relationship with time and filling it going forward.
I like thinking about.
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna comment one more time on
Yeah, go ahead.
elasticity because I think that's a really cool idea, and I think of like, I think this could be for anyone when you embark on like a big project and you're in the throes of it, and then once you get completed and you look back on it like, oh, that wasn't so bad, and that for me was like this graduate program, which was like 5 years, and I'm starting it, and I'm just like, oh my god, I'm gonna be here forever, and like this is the worst, and you're in it, and the days are long because you're sad, and like, but then you get to the end and you're like, oh, that actually wasn't so bad. Like kind of like, I don't know if it's. Sometimes I'm sure it could lead to almost like a PTSD effect where you're like, oh no, this is still like, I'm not over it yet, or it could do the flip side. Sorry. Or it does the flip thing where and I've heard of this one, I don't know how true this is because I haven't given birth, but I've heard like after you deliver a baby and then you look back like, oh, that wasn't so bad, I could have another one. But like looking up to it, you're like, this is gonna be the worst pain ever. Like, I don't know. I think the
It's a
concept
good pain.
is yeah. Worthwhile.
There was some research recently published in the field of quantum mechanics that questions whether or not time, whether time can bend, whether time really does move in this straight line. And it always makes me think about two things. One is deja vu, and like anyone who's experienced deja vu, like you have to wonder, like, how did this happen? I had this experience today, and I was like, wow, like I'm having this conversation all over again, and how is that possible? And then also the sensation of when we're thinking about somebody and then they call us or they appear, and how is that elicited if we only are in this instant and they are only in that instant? Like, do we conjure them instantaneously, or are they on a like different track? I don't know, and I'm really curious what science can teach us about this moving forward, because I think that it's probably a more surreal world than we know it to be.
I'm kind of interested in, Mary talked about the convergence of time with art. And it seems, like a film, a poem, a lot of these experiences even eating food, have to be done over time, but not art. So I'm just really interested about, well, yes, you can come back and look at the painting, but I'm interested a little more of this idea of convergence of time, where you experience time. I know you do as a creative person, but the viewer, how does the viewer experience, if at all, time with visual
Well,
work?
there's several ways, well, there's millions of ways. I think if I try to conjure up some of the old philosophers in my head, what has been said, I mean, the audience can look at an image fast, and not see it, or not want to see it, or the way I understand it, or the way I always explain it, is an image, unlike language, verbal language or written language, is the experience of looking at art is something that washes over you. So it's like this convergent everything, like more like a wave of time than if we're reading, we specifically have to do that in a very, a particular order, or we can't read. Or if we're looking at math or poetry, literature, and actually films, we tend to always look at them in a linear, from the start to the end. Sometimes we may disrupt that, but I think art is, or visual art on the wall, is one of those things that can wash over you, rather than having to, and then then our minds kick in, and we start to look at the different things, and then we start putting rationale and reason to it rather than just the experience of it. So in that way, when I was talking about convergence of time earlier, I was thinking of my experience, like I can be thinking of something that happened 20 years ago and just be in that converging with the day that's present and all of that converges. That's one thing, but this other experience of art for the viewer, the time is also a kind of convergence, or I think of it more like a wave washing over the person. And that's really if the artwork speaks to the audience. That's when the audience will stop and look at it. You know, we don't want to look at all art all the time. So.
This exchange is reminding me, so Joni Mitchell, the live recording of her album Miles of Aisles, she's playing the circle game and she's reflecting on the difference between the visual arts and the performing arts. And she said, you know, that's one thing that's been a major difference to me because people are asking her to play the circle game. And she says, you know, a painter does a painting and he does a painting. He had the joy of creating it. Somebody buys it, maybe nobody buys it, and it sits in some shed somewhere. But nobody ever said to Van Gogh, paint a starry night again, man. Like, he did it, and that was it. Whereas a visual artist gets asked, or a performing artist gets asked to perform the same thing over and over and over again. And they end up changing it around because it would be terribly boring to play the same thing over and over again. And a painter, you might do the same series, like the same subject, but you're never going to paint the same painting.
No. Well, some artists might, I guess. I won't. But you're making me think of, I've gone to visit some of my artwork that I no longer own, and I see it somewhere and I'm like, oh my God, I did that? You know, because the time between the creation and then the disconnect, not seeing it for years, and then going back, and it's like, you know, and I'll look at it like, how much time did I, like, wow, yeah. So it's I don't know, it's all confusing, but yeah. It's some
I'm thinking back to the question that Jenny asked about seeing a film at different stages of your life, and then this idea of art washing over you. And I'm thinking that it can be really, you can stand in front of a piece of art, or you can read a poem again and again, and each time it can be quite different for you. And you'll see things that you didn't see the first time. And I think it says a lot about where you are at that moment, and you're changing all the time. And so I think that's one reason we can keep coming back to our favorite pieces of art or literature or film, and we'll just see something entirely different when we get there.
And performative art and film, also the way we experience it, well, you touched on this earlier with this idea of different times that we visit things, and Linda, you're saying that, and you know, it's almost as if we don't really have we don't have a locked memory, because when we revisit things, it's so different than we thought it was.
Just wanted to mention about time with myself. I work as a full-time graphic designer, but I'm an artist outside work. I just started selling work last year, but it was a matter of trying to make time to do the art and set that aside. That was really a challenge for me because I work full-time. And so what I've been lately doing is just setting a certain amount of time during the day. So after work, sometimes I'll go to the harbor and I'll paint from like around 5:30 till sunset or so. Like, what do you do with your time? Like, how do you set time to like do your projects? And like, do you ever have these like blockages and you're like trying to work creatively and you just can't get it out there?
All you could do is just keep going to work. You know? And I'm sure you think about work outside of work.
Oh, there's no work-life balance.
Yeah.
Science charges forward. So I totally get what you're saying.
And it's really, that's, yeah, I think everyone has that. Not just artists, but everyone has
think
that.
for everyone.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
It's like a special
it
skill.
reminds me of a question I heard a Buddhist monk ask one time. Let's see, it went like, given that your life is fleeting, how do you want to live? So the question of how do you fit in your art to your life, if you start with that notion of, you know, my life is finite and how do I want to spend it, I think that pressure to create is going to find a way in the day to help you figure out when to do it.
And I would say it's very smart to be trying to do that at a younger age than wait until you're older.
Just making a matter of that time for myself. Like we get so caught up with work and with life and different tasks that we have to do that I feel like we got to set more time for ourselves. It's just something I've been practicing it lately, and it's been really nice.
It's like a form of prioritizing yourself, like prioritizing the work that you want to submit your fleeting life to, it sounds like. Yeah.
So all this talk about the time is kind of making me kind of wonder, looking back, like how time is, not all time is equal. Like you're living this life, and I often go back to my memories for my paintings, and when I feel like there are certain moments that when they were happening, they were very mundane. But now, from looking back, they are so important, and I feel like I relive them over and over, and sometimes I harness this one part of it, sometimes it's the emotion, sometimes it's this. And I'm just wondering, like, wow, you know, how we really don't have control over even on the quality of time, I would say. When you're living it, it doesn't, you know, so it's just like kind of just very interesting, and I would love to hear from you guys if you kind of reflect back on your time. It's like your thoughts on it, just a question.
Yeah, I'll jump on that. That's actually really interesting. So the film that I'm working on now, whatever it is that I'm working on now, I got a grant from Brown to work on this thing. It was supposed to be this $25,000 to, I was gonna get all these archivists to talk about archives and black life and stuff. And they sort of cut it so that they like split it up and gave it to different people. And so it wasn't enough money to do what I wanted to do. But it was enough money for me to, again, go down south and try and figure out my life or whatever. And what I ended up with, you know, after sort of being like, okay, I give up, you know, and just sort of reflexively recording myself. Just recording myself for the last like year and a half. And then watching it back, probably for this whole year, watching back all of that footage, what the film is sort of ending up being are these sort of moments that I didn't, you know, I'm just sort of recording myself, just me recording myself all the time. Now I'm like watching myself, recording myself, and picking out the moments that I guess were important, and it is sort of changing the way that I'm thinking about life and what is important in life, because in my mind before it would have been what would have been cute on Instagram, or it would have been, you know, some other thing, but it's certainly not the moments that I thought were going to come out of it. You know, there's this one clip, there's this one clip of me in Amsterdam where I have like a GoPro attached to a mirror, and you can see me kind of trying to be like, oh yeah, archives, blah, 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 blah. And I'm recording myself, I'm like screen recording myself watching this, and watching back the screen recording of me watching this
my
thing. Yeah, it's
It's on.
me too. My brain is also working. Watching back the screen recording of me watching this back, I keep rewinding this one part where you can see on my face how like sad I am. I'm like terribly sad, but I'm trying to be like archives, archives, and then there's just, you know, like again, when you're recording film, the time is such a thing where you can collapse into a micro expression, and I can just see it on my face, and which, if I wasn't such an archival freak, probably would have lived on in my memory as a moment that I was sad and I didn't acknowledge that I
It
was
sounds
sad.
so much like you're going in the future, in the past, in the present.
Yeah, somebody please help me.
Like, you're like, where are you?
Where am I literally?
We could take a break.
There
right
was
now.
one more
No,
question.
we need to change the battery on the camera, so
Oh.
I would like us to take a break before the battery dies, and just hold it to her for 5 minutes, just so she can change the.
Or we could do one last question
Wait, well,
and call
that's
it.
all right.
Yeah, we just.
She says no.
He's gone.
Is it gone? Is it under a minute? 4 minutes? We could do 4 minutes and then call it.
Okay.
No?
Call us? Okay.
Sorry, that's my producer.
The gentleman in the back has been waiting.
I feel that our sensation of time, as we flow through it flows through us, as we try to swim into the future or hold on to the past, it's socially contagious.
Mhm.
So that we have dialogue with people, and that affects our sensation of the flow of time. We also have dialogue with creative works, and I think that's what the arts do, is that they set up a dialogue with us that changes our perception of time.
Ooh,
That's really
Nice.
nice.
Very nice.
And,
Yeah,
I just want to make one comment, a cross-cultural comment about time. I was a history major. I went to Japan, so 1968, and I'm on a trolley in Osaka. And so I'm very young. And I noticed all these people turning and staring at me. And so at the time, I just thought, oh, they're just curious about this Westerner. But I realized they were also really trying to reconcile their sense of who is this person. And so few years before, we were enemies. They were bombing us. And it has taken me a long time to realize that I was a stand-in for, government policy, war practices that are pretty horrific, very horrific, as we know. So it's very interesting to, I was feeling jet lagged at that moment. I barely just arrived. So I was feeling time in a totally different way as well. But it was this sort of juxtaposition of just suddenly being thrust into their daily life. There was this person. I wasn't even in the center of the city. I was in kind of an exurb. And they were shocked to see this Western young woman there. What is she doing there? So it was interesting to face that experience and contemplate what does that mean for time for them, how painful it was. And for me, embarking on something brand new, it was exciting, so it was really a strange connection.
Did you understand it at the time, Susan?
Yeah, somewhat, as I say.
What literature?
I think we're running out of battery time, but we've got more time if you'd like to stay and talk informally. We have some snacks and beverages in the back. This has been a wonderful session. I can't thank you all enough, and please join me.
Nice to meet you. Remember these meets,
We did it. Oh, did you really?
right?